It's dawn on a freezing October morning in 1280 CE, and you're the sheriff of Nottinghamshire. You stumble out of bed in your manor house, already dreading the journey ahead. In 2 days, you must appear before the Exchequer at Westminster with your accounts. And if you're even a single penny short, you could lose everything. Your breath visible in the cold air, you review the tallies and rolls one more time, knowing that 28 royal officials will scrutinize every transaction you've made this year. Welcome to life as a medieval sheriff. It's not quite the glamorous position of power it might seem. Today we're diving into what daily existence was actually like for sheriffs in medieval England, the king's chief representatives in each county. And I'm warning you right now, this is going to shatter any romantic notions you might have about this role. We're talking crushing financial burdens, constant accusations of corruption, the power to raise small armies, and accounting sessions that could land you in prison if your numbers didn't add up. Let's start with what a sheriff actually was. The word itself comes from shire reeve, literally the king's manager of a shire, or county. The office dated back to Anglo-Saxon times, first appearing around 970 CE during the reign of King Edgar. By 1280, when our story takes place, the position had evolved into one of the most powerful and dangerous offices a man could hold. From tax collector to law enforcer, your impossible job description. As sheriff, you were the king's man in your county. But what exactly did that mean? Everything. Literally everything. Your duties were so vast and varied that it's remarkable anyone could manage them all. First and foremost, you were a tax collector. This was your primary function, and it would define your entire experience as sheriff. The king expected a fixed sum from your county, the county farm, determined years earlier by the Domesday Survey. At Easter and Michaelmas, twice a year, you had to appear at the Exchequer in Westminster and account for every penny. Not most pennies. Every single penny. The Easter session was your interim accounting. You'd arrive at Westminster with cash, wooden tallies as receipts for money already paid, and copies of any writs or royal pardons that allowed you to deduct expenses. You'd stand before a massive table, 10 feet by 5 feet, covered with a checkered cloth. This is where the Exchequer got its name, from the French word for chessboard, échiquier. The table had a raised lip to prevent counters from falling off as royal officials calculated your accounts. 28 officials would examine you. The chief justiciar presided unless the king himself was present. The chancellor sat with the Great Seal. Barons of the Exchequer, men chosen for their excellence and discretion, would decide any disputes. A clerk recorded everything on parchment rolls called pipe rolls. Another official placed counters on the checkered cloth, moving them around to represent the calculations. The Chamberlain sergeant compared your tallies against the Treasury's counter tallies. And you sat across from all of them, alone, hoping your accounts balanced. If you were short, the barons decided whether to let you carry the debt forward or detain you immediately pending full payment. Some sheriffs ended up in prison for failing to balance their books. Others found themselves so deeply in debt they never recovered. The Michaelmas accounting in late September was worse. This was your final reckoning for the entire year. Everything had to be recorded in writing on the roll. If your numbers didn't match what the Exchequer expected, if peasants in your county hadn't paid their full taxes, if you'd suffered losses from theft or bad harvests, if you'd given yourself too much in expenses, you were personally liable for the shortfall. But tax collection was just the beginning. You were also the chief law enforcement officer of your county. You presided over the county court, which met roughly once a month. You investigated crimes and conducted preliminary examinations of accused criminals. You could try minor offenses yourself: petty theft, small disputes, breaches of the peace. For serious crimes like murder, rape, or grand theft, you had to detain the accused until the king's traveling judges arrived for the assize courts. You executed all royal writs, orders from the king or his courts. A merchant won a judgment for debt. You had to seize the debtor's property. The king ordered someone's arrest. You made it happen. Someone needed to be hanged. You organized the execution. You assembled juries when needed, pulling together local men to hear cases. You guarded prisoners in the county jail and were personally responsible if they escaped. You also commanded military forces. When the king needed troops, you raised them from your county. The Statute of Winchester of 1285 formalized your power to summon the posse comitatus, literally the power of the county. Every able-bodied man in your shire could be conscripted to chase criminals or defend the realm. When someone raised the hue and cry after witnessing a crime, you could mobilize hundreds of armed men to pursue the criminal. Refuse to answer your summons? That carried heavy fines. And there was more. You supervised local markets and fairs. You ensured weights and measures were honest. You reported on conditions in your county to the king. You chose parliamentary representatives. By the 14th century, sheriffs had become highly influential in determining who sat in parliament, how you actually made money, and why everyone hated you. Here's where things get interesting and dark. The position of sheriff wasn't salaried in the modern sense. Instead, you were allowed to farm your taxes. This meant you could collect more than you owed the Exchequer and keep the difference as profit. Let's say your county farm was set at £300 per year. If you could squeeze £350 from the taxpayers, that extra £50 was yours. You were exempt from paying taxes yourself as compensation for your duties. You got choice acreage for your use, and you had virtually unlimited opportunities to skim additional money off the top. This system was ripe for corruption and abuse. Medieval records overflow with complaints about sheriffs extorting money, taking bribes, and using their power to threaten, intimidate, and enrich themselves. One chronicler noted that sheriffs had great power, and any threat they made to extort money could probably be carried out with impunity. You could charge fees for everything. Releasing someone from your jail? That cost money. Removing a prisoner's irons? More money. Want to avoid being arrested on dubious charges? Better pay up. Even when torture was technically illegal, some sheriffs used it anyway, or threatened to use it, to extract payments from wealthy prisoners. The poor lived in terror of sheriffs. The rich knew they could be shaken down at any moment. A sheriff loyal to a powerful noble could sabotage the careers of knights his patron disliked. Groups of well-connected sheriffs held more practical power than most knights, despite lacking lands and titles. This is why the Sheriff of Nottingham became the archetypal villain in the Robin Hood legends. The character wasn't created from nothing. He represented the real fear and hatred ordinary people felt toward sheriffs who used tax collection as license for oppression. When the barons forced King John to sign Magna Carta in 1215, 5 clauses dealt directly with restricting sheriffs' abuses. Another clause specifically removed certain named sheriffs from office for their crimes. The crushing financial pressure when the job destroys you. But here's the twist. Being a sheriff could also financially ruin you. Many men did not seek the office. They were appointed by the king and couldn't refuse without severe consequences. And despite the opportunities for profit, the position carried enormous financial risks. You were personally liable for the full county farm whether or not you could actually collect it. Peasants who couldn't pay taxes, your problem. Tax evaders who fled, your problem. Noble landowners who claimed exemptions, your problem. The Exchequer didn't care about your excuses. They wanted their money. Medieval economic conditions fluctuated wildly. A bad harvest could devastate tax revenues. The Black Death in the 14th century killed so many peasants that tax bases collapsed. Wars disrupted trade and agriculture. Yet the county farm remained fixed at rates set decades or even centuries earlier, based on outdated Domesday Book valuations that no longer reflected economic reality. Some sheriffs went deep into debt trying to meet their obligations. Others were imprisoned when they couldn't pay. The office was not one that was universally sought, as one medieval document noted. The holders often found themselves deep in debt or in prison for failure to balance their account with the Exchequer. The constant harassment from Exchequer officials meant the position was rapidly becoming a financial burden, and those who undertook these duties did so at considerable risk. It was expensive to be sheriff. If your taxpayers didn't pay in full, you had to make up the difference from your own pocket. This is why by the 13th century, reforms limited sheriff terms to just 1 year. Originally, sheriffs served for years, sometimes decades. Some men held multiple counties simultaneously. Hugh of Buckland, under Henry I, was sheriff of 8 counties at once. But the kings realized that long-serving sheriffs became entrenched and unaccountable. They built up networks of corruption and became too powerful. The 1-year term was meant to prevent this, but it also meant you had just 12 months to figure out an impossible job before your Michaelmas reckoning. The daily reality: violence, power, and fear. So what was a typical day actually like? You woke early because your responsibilities started at dawn. County court might be meeting. You had to preside, hear disputes, issue judgments, fine wrongdoers. The king's writ arrived requiring you to seize someone's property for debt. You dispatched your bailiffs and sergeants to do it, knowing they'd take their own cuts along the way. A crime was reported. A merchant murdered on the road to market. You rode out with your men to investigate. You questioned witnesses, examined the body, tried to identify the killer. If you caught someone, you detained them in your jail until the traveling judges arrived. If the killer fled, you raised the hue and cry, mobilizing armed men from nearby villages to search. Tax collection consumed your time. You sent bailiffs throughout your hundreds, the subdivisions of your county, demanding payments. You sat with knights from each hundred to assess how much geld was owed. You dealt with disputes over who owed what. You recorded everything meticulously because those Exchequer officials would examine every tally at Easter and Michaelmas. You handled an endless stream of writs from Westminster. The king wanted troops raised for Scotland. A nobleman petitioned for the arrest of his enemy. The Pope's tax collectors needed protection. Every writ had to be executed precisely and recorded carefully. Your clerks, if you could afford them, helped maintain your records, but you were personally responsible for every decision, and you walked a constant tightrope between competing powers. The king expected absolute obedience and full payment. Local nobles expected favors and wanted you to ignore crimes by their retainers. Townspeople wanted protection from raiders and fair treatment in court. Everyone wanted something, and disappointing powerful people could end your career or your life. You could behead criminals on the spot if you caught them in the act, but only if the coroner was present to witness it. You could torture prisoners, though it was technically illegal. You could summarily fine people for contempt in your court. Your powers were vast, your authority nearly absolute within your shire. But one accounting error at the Exchequer could destroy you. When your powers began to wane, and what replaced you. By the 14th century, sheriff power was already declining. The position remained important, but other offices were chipping away at your authority. Coroners, first mentioned in 1194, took over investigating deaths and ensuring that fines went to the king rather than disappearing into sheriff's pockets. Local constables, established around 1242, handled more routine peacekeeping in towns and villages. Justices of the peace, first known in the 12th century as keepers of the peace, gradually assumed many judicial functions. By the late 14th century, especially after the Black Death, JPs could punish rioters, arrest criminals, try certain offenses, and enforce labor laws. They eventually replaced much of the sheriff's court system. The traveling assize judges reduced your judicial authority. You still arrested and detained criminals, but the serious trials happened under judges sent from Westminster. You lost the power to decide life and death cases, though you still organized the executions after judgment. The centralization of royal administration created alternatives to sheriff power. Professional bureaucrats in Westminster handled more administrative functions. Standing courts reduced reliance on county courts. Professional law enforcement gradually emerged, though this process took centuries. Yet the office survived. It evolved into primarily a ceremonial role, but sheriffs continued executing high court writs until 2004. The tradition of sheriffs at parliamentary elections continues today. The office, dating back over 1,000 years, proved remarkably resilient, even as its practical power faded. Why any of this matters? The medieval sheriff embodied the fundamental tension in governance: how to extend central authority across vast territories without creating local tyrants. Kings needed representatives who could collect taxes, enforce laws, and maintain order. But giving anyone that much power invited corruption and abuse. The sheriff system shaped English legal tradition profoundly. The checks and balances developed to restrain sheriffs, coroners, traveling judges, fixed terms, detailed accounting became foundational principles. The requirement to appear before independent judges, to justify every penny collected, to face prosecution for abuse of power, these ideas influenced legal systems worldwide. The office also reveals medieval economic realities. Tax collection was personal, face-to-face, and violent. There was no modern bureaucracy, no impersonal forms and computer systems. Real men rode out to real villages and demanded real payment from real people who often couldn't afford it. The sheriff stood at the intersection of royal power and peasant poverty, enriching himself while serving the crown. Life as a medieval sheriff was simultaneously powerful and precarious. You commanded armies, judged criminals, collected vast sums of money. People feared you. Some would say hated you. You could destroy someone's life with a word. Yet twice a year you had to stand alone before the Exchequer's officials, hoping your accounts balanced, knowing that failure meant prison or financial ruin. You were tax collector, judge, military commander, and royal spy. You enriched yourself through corruption while drowning in financial liability. You maintained order through violence and fear while being constantly accused of abuse. You answered to everyone and no one, serving the king, oppressing the people, fearing the Exchequer. The medieval sheriff was the king's strong right hand in every county, and that hand was often stained with both gold and blood. If you enjoyed this deep dive into what life was really like as a medieval sheriff, smash that like button and subscribe for more analytical approaches to medieval history. What other aspects of medieval daily life would you like to see covered? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.